The rhythmic tapping of Alexander Lee's fingers against the chrome armrest echoed through the examination room of Metro General Hospital. Outside the window, autumn leaves scattered across the parking lot. Their dance a stark contrast to the sterile whiteness within. At 45, Alexander's weathered hands bore the calluses of 2 decades in construction. Each mark was a testament to the company he'd built from the ground up. Tracy Painley's manicured fingers interlaced with his, her wedding ring catching the fluorescent light. 18 years of marriage had taught him every nuance of her touch. But today, something felt different. Mechanical, perhaps rehearsed. "The coughs are probably just stress," Tracy said, her voice carrying an odd note of tension. "You've been working too hard on that new development project," she added. Alexander cleared his throat, suppressing another cough. "Maybe, but Jonathan insisted on these tests." The door opened with a soft click as Dr. Jonathan Griffith entered, his casual stride betraying none of the gravity in his eyes. The thick manila folder in his hands felt as if it were made of lead. "Alex, Tracy, Jonathan," he began, pulling up his rolling stool, though their use of first names, a remnant of their college days, could not hide the professional distance in his tone. "I've got your test results." Alexander felt Tracy's hand twitch as her other hand slipped into her purse, her fingers brushing against her phone. "The imaging shows a mass in your left lung," Jonathan continued in measured, careful tones. "The biopsy confirms it's malignant, stage 3, non-small cell lung cancer," he stated. The words hung in the air like smoke. Alexander's mind began calculating angles, measuring distances, planning solutions he could not build with blueprints. "What's the survival rate?" Alexander asked, his entrepreneurial instinct pushing him toward concrete numbers. Jonathan leaned forward, spreading several scan images across the small table. "With aggressive treatment, the 5-year survival rate is around 30%. But Alex, you're younger than most patients we see with this diagnosis, and your overall health is excellent. We have multiple treatment options available." Tracy's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then quickly tucked it away. "What kind of treatment options?" she asked. "We're looking at a combination approach," Jonathan explained while pulling out several pamphlets. "Chemotherapy will be our primary weapon, but we'll also consider radiation therapy. There are also some promising clinical trials." Tracy's phone buzzed again. This time she stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "I need some air," she mumbled, her voice thick with emotion. In her haste, her phone clattered onto the chair as she rushed out. Alexander reached for the device, intending to bring it to her. The screen lit up with another notification, and his world shifted on its axis. The message preview showed a name familiar for 20 years. Rick Nunez. The words that followed turned Alexander's blood to ice water. "Babe, finally. Now we don't have to poison him slowly. Nature's doing our job. Once he's gone. The kids already agreed to testify that he was abusive, so we get everything." Alexander's hands trembled as he held the phone. The medical pamphlets scattered, forgotten at his feet. He turned the screen toward Jonathan, whose professional demeanor cracked as he read the message. "My God," Jonathan whispered. Quickly closing the door, Tracy had left it open. "Whatever you do next, don't let them know you've seen this. Don't let them suspect anything's wrong," Jonathan cautioned. Alexander stared at the phone, his mind racing through years of memories. Rick Nunez, his best friend since college, the best man at his wedding, godfather to his children, the man who had helped him start his construction company, who spent countless weekends at their home, who coached Marcus's Little League team. The children, Emma and Marcus, filled his thoughts. "They're saying my children," Jonathan murmured, moving closer and speaking in hushed tones. "Alex, listen to me carefully. You're facing 2 battles now, and both are literally life or death. We need to start your treatment immediately, but you also must protect yourself and your children. Do you have someone you trust? Someone neither Tracy nor Rick would suspect?" Alexander's mind wandered to a recent project, a home adaptation for a disabled veteran's son. Glenn Massey, a retired Marine Corps intelligence officer, had insisted on paying something despite Alexander's offer to do it at cost. They spent several evenings talking while the work was completed, and Glenn had given Alexander his card with a promise. "If you ever need anything, day or night, call me." Alexander replied, "I might." He quickly forwarded the message to his email before deleting it from Tracy's phone. The door handle turned and Tracy reappeared, her composure restored. She smiled apologetically, though the expression didn't reach her eyes. "Sorry about that. It was just overwhelming." "Of course," Jonathan replied smoothly, handing her back her phone. "As I was saying about the treatment options." Alexander sat through the rest of the consultation in a daze, nodding at appropriate intervals while his mind raced. Every touch of Tracy's hand now felt like a serpent's caress. Every concerned look she gave him carried the weight of years of deception, but he maintained his facade, remembering Jonathan's warning. As they left the hospital, with Tracy's hand on his arm, Alexander thought of his children. Emma, 17, with dreams of becoming an architect like her father, and Marcus, 15, who had inherited his love for baseball and building things. What lies had they been fed? What poison had been dripped into their ears? "I'll drive," Tracy offered gently. "You've had enough shocks for one day." "If you only knew," Alexander thought as he followed her to their car. He pulled out his phone ostensibly to check work messages, but his fingers moved to compose a text to Glenn Massey. "Need your help. Matter of life and death. Can we meet tonight?" The response came almost immediately. "My office. 8 p.m. Come alone." Glenn Massey's basement office looked nothing like the stereotypical private investigator's office from noir films. It resembled a military command center with multiple monitors displaying security feeds and a wall of sophisticated equipment that hummed quietly. The space smelled of coffee and gun oil, and the only concession to comfort was a worn leather couch where Alexander now sat, his hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. "Run it by me again," Glenn said, his short gray military hair catching the blue light from the monitors. "Every detail matters." Alexander recounted the day's events, his voice growing stronger. Glenn's presence had a steadying effect. He was used to dealing with crises and understood strategy and survival. The message mentioned poison. Glenn noted while typing rapidly on one of his keyboards, "Have you experienced any unusual symptoms besides the cough?" Alexander's hand went to his throat reflexively. "The cough started about 6 months ago. Tracy has been very insistent about my taking various supplements that she says will boost my immune system." Glenn paused his typing. "We'll need samples of everything you've been taking. And Alex, stop taking them immediately." "You think they actually?" "I think we assume the worst and work backward from there," Glenn continued, pulling up several databases on his screens. "Rick Nunez, you said. Let's see what we can find about your best friend." Over the next 2 weeks, while Alexander began his initial cancer treatments, Glenn's investigation uncovered a pattern that made the original betrayal seem almost quaint by comparison. "Look at this," Glenn said one evening, spreading surveillance photos across his desk. "Rick's not just involved with Tracy. He's been systematically embezzling from your company through a series of ghost contracts." Alexander examined the documents, noticing discrepancies in material orders and labor costs. "These invoices are for projects we never did," he observed. "Exactly. And that's just the beginning," Glenn said, pulling up financial records. "They've taken out additional life insurance policies in your name. The signatures are forged, but the dates are telling. Each policy was purchased shortly after your first symptoms appeared." Alexander leaned back, running a hand through his thinning hair. The chemotherapy had already begun to take its toll, but the evidence of such calculated betrayal hit harder than any treatment. "What about my children?" he asked, dreading the answer. Glenn's expression darkened. "That's where it gets worse. I've been monitoring their communications," and he reached for a different folder. "You need to see this, but I want you to prepare yourself. Inside were transcripts of text messages and emails between Tracy, Rick, and various child psychologists. The systematic manipulation of his children's memories was laid out in clinical detail. "They've been working on this for years," Glenn explained. "Selective reinforcement of negative experiences, subtle suggestions, even creating false memories of events that never happened. It's called memory implantation, and they've been doing it to both Emma and Marcus." Alexander read through the transcripts, his hands shaking with rage. How could they do this to children? To their own children? "That's the other thing," Glenn said quietly. "I don't think they plan to keep the children around once they get what they want." He played an audio recording, the voices of Tracy and Rick filling the room. "Once we get their testimony and the insurance money, we'll need to disappear," Tracy's voice said. "The kids will just complicate things." "They're old enough to make their own way," Rick replied. "Besides, they'll never forgive us once they realize what we did. Better to make a clean break." Alexander surged to his feet, pacing the length of Glenn's office. "I need to tell them. I need to show them what's happening." "Not yet," Glenn cautioned. "We need more. We need to catch them in the act. Document everything. If we move too soon, they'll deny it all. And right now, your kids are primed to believe them over you." The video footage played on Glenn's largest monitor, the high-definition image crystal clear despite being shot through a window at Rick's lake house. Alexander watched, heartbroken, as Tracy and Rick sat with Emma and Marcus on an expensive leather couch that he never knew Rick owned. "Try to remember, Emma." Tracy's voice came through the directional microphone. "You were 7, maybe 8. Your father had been drinking." "I don't," Emma said, her face scrunching in confusion. "I remember being scared, but not the plate." Rick gently placed his hand on Emma's shoulder. "Remember the plate I threw?" Emma's eyes widened. "Yes, I remember now. I was so angry." Alexander gripped the arms of his chair. "I never threw anything. I've never even raised my voice to them." "That's the insidious part," said Dr. Claire McPherson, the child psychologist whom Glenn had brought in to consult. "They're not just lying to your children. They're actually changing their memories." The human mind is surprisingly malleable, especially regarding childhood experiences. On the screen, Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I don't remember Dad throwing anything." "You were younger," Tracy said smoothly. "Sometimes we block out traumatic memories to protect ourselves. But they're still there, honey. That's why you get anxious when people raise their voices." Marcus pulled at a loose thread on his sleeve, a habit Alexander recognized from whenever his son was troubled. "I guess, but Dad's never scared me." "Not really. That's just the fear talking," Rick interjected. "It's okay, buddy. We're here to help you remember the truth," Rick said. Glenn stopped the footage. "Marcus is your weak link in their chain. He's showing resistance to the implanted memories. If we're going to break this open, he might be our best chance." Alexander stared at the frozen image of his children, his hands trembling slightly from his latest round of chemotherapy. They're taking everything from them. Not just their father, but their real memories. Their sense of what's true. Glenn promised, his military bearing more pronounced. "We're going to save your kids and make them pay for every lie they've told." Dr. McPherson nodded in agreement. "Once we expose the manipulation, we can begin proper therapy to help them separate fact from implanted fiction. But we need to move carefully. A premature confrontation could push them further into Tracy and Rick's narrative." Alexander moved closer to the screen and touched the image of his children's faces, leaving a smudge on the monitor. "How much more evidence do we need?" he asked. "We're close," Glenn assured him. "My contacts at the FBI are building a case for criminal charges. We just need to catch them explicitly planning their next move. Keep going with your treatments, and keep acting normal. Let them think their plan is working." Alexander nodded, his builder's mind already constructing a different kind of project. Not of wood and steel, but of truth and justice. He would rebuild his family's foundation, stronger than before. But first, he had to carefully dismantle the web of lies that threatened to destroy everything he loved. "Whatever it takes," he said quietly, his voice carrying the determination that had built his company from nothing. "Whatever it takes to save my children." Sylvia Sayer's corner office overlooked the city's downtown district, its windows streaked with early morning rain. The criminal defense attorney's desk bore no family photos, just neat stacks of case files and a single potted succulent. Glenn had recommended her for precisely this reason. "Walk me through the timeline again," Sylvia said, her Mont Blanc pen hovering over a legal pad as she filled 3 pages with notes during their 2-hour meeting. "When did you first notice the supplements?" Alexander pulled out his phone, checking the calendar app. The chemotherapy sometimes made his memory fuzzy. "Tracy started the vitamins about 8 months ago. Small white pills, she said, would boost my immune system. And the cough began 2 months after that," he recalled. "She was insistent, watching me take them every morning." Sylvia's pen scratched across the paper. "We'll need those pills analyzed. Glenn, can your lab contacts handle that discreetly?" Glenn nodded from his position by the window. "I've already sent samples to a private lab in Virginia. We should have results by the end of the week." Sylvia turned to a fresh page. "Now about the company finances. These ghost contracts Rick created. I need every detail." Alexander spread the financial documents across Sylvia's desk. "I had caught discrepancies that others might have missed," he explained. "See these material orders. The quantities don't match any of our actual projects. And here," he pointed to a series of invoices, "the labor costs are for a crew that doesn't exist." "How long has Rick had access to your company's finances?" Sylvia asked. "He helped me start the business 20 years ago, and handled most of the accounting since then," Alexander replied, his voice cracking. "I trusted him with everything." Sylvia's expression softened slightly. "That's exactly what predators like Rick count on. Trust is their hunting ground." She pulled up another file on her computer. "Look at this," she said. The screen showed police reports from 3 different states. Rick's name appeared in each one, though with slight variations. Richard Nunez, Rick Nunez Martinez, R.G. Nunez. "Same pattern," Sylvia explained. "He targets successful business owners, particularly those in construction or real estate, usually through their wives. The affairs last 2 to 3 years while he systematically drains the companies. When the money's gone, both he and the wife disappear. But the children," Alexander's hands clenched. "They've never targeted the children before. That is what makes your case different." A new voice joined the conversation as Dr. Claire McPherson entered the office, carrying a thick folder. Her professional demeanor masked obvious concern. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Call me Claire," she said, taking the seat next to Alexander. "I've reviewed the video footage Glenn provided. What they're doing to your children is a form of psychological abuse called memory implantation, similar to techniques used in cult programming." Alexander's throat tightened. "Can it be reversed?" "With proper therapy, yes. But we need to document everything first. Every session with the children. Every story they plant. It's all evidence of systematic abuse." Glenn's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. "Speaking of documentation, they've scheduled another therapy session with the kids for tomorrow." "Where?" Sylvia asked. "Rick's lake house again. They seem to favor it for these sessions. We'll have audio and visual coverage," Claire said, her tone professional, but her eyes angry. Alexander pushed himself to his feet, fighting a wave of chemotherapy-induced nausea. "What's our next step?" Sylvia gathered the documents into organized piles. "We build an airtight case. Every financial transaction, every forged document, every manipulative session with the children. We document it all. Glenn's surveillance gives us the evidence. Claire provides expert testimony on the psychological abuse, and I'll ensure it holds up in court." "And the children?" Alexander asked, his voice heavy with worry. "How do we protect them while this plays out?" "We watch and wait," Claire advised. Any premature intervention could push them further into Tracy and Rick's narrative. We need them to begin questioning things on their own. As if on cue, Glenn's phone buzzed again. His eyebrows rose as he read the message. Marcus just texted his mother, asking to visit you in the hospital tomorrow. Alexander's heart leaped. He hadn't visited since the diagnosis. This could be important, Claire cautioned. But remember, no confrontation, no accusations. Just listen and observe. Marcus needs to come to his realizations naturally. The hospital room's afternoon light cast long shadows across Alexander's bed. The chemotherapy dripped steadily, marking time like a metronome. He timed this treatment deliberately, wanting Marcus to see the reality of his condition, not for sympathy, but for truth. Marcus entered hesitantly, his lanky teenage frame folding in on itself. At 15, he stood as tall as his father, but today he looked smaller, uncertain. "Hey, Dad," Marcus said, hovering near the door with his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. "You look like I'm fighting cancer." Alexander offered a weak smile. "It's okay to say it," he replied. Marcus moved closer, taking the chair beside the bed. His eyes darted to the 4 bags, the monitors, the evidence of his father's battle. "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes the medicines they use to fight cancer are pretty strong," Marcus asked. Alexander kept his voice neutral, factual. "The doctors say I'm responding well." A nurse entered to check Alexander's vitals, nodding approvingly before leaving them alone again. The silence stretched between father and son, filled with unasked questions. Finally, Marcus spoke in a whisper. "Dad, something doesn't feel right." Alexander's heart raced, but he remained calm. "What do you mean?" "Last week, I heard Mom and Rick arguing. They didn't know I was home. I had forgotten my baseball glove and returned early from practice," Marcus explained, pulling at a loose thread on his sleeve. "Rick said something about sticking to the story, and Mom said they couldn't risk the kids finding out the truth." Alexander recounted, gripping the hospital blanket but forcing his hands to relax. "That must have been confusing, with the memories they keep talking about," he said. Marcus looked up, his eyes searching his father's face. "The plate you supposedly threw. I keep trying to remember it, but it feels wrong, like a movie I never watched." Years of construction had taught Alexander that nothing lasting could be built on shifting sand. He thought carefully before speaking. "Marcus, what do you remember about your childhood? Not what you've been told to remember. What do you actually remember?" Marcus furrowed his brow. "I remember you teaching me to use tools in your workshop. You were always careful, ensuring I knew about safety first. And when I got frustrated because I couldn't do something right, you never yelled. You just said, 'Measure twice, cut once,'" Alexander added. "Those are real memories, aren't they?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking. Alexander reached for his son's hand, relief flooding him as Marcus did not pull away. "I would never hurt you or your sister. Every memory of love, patience, and learning together is real." Marcus's shoulders began to shake. "They've been lying to us. Mom and Rick have been making us believe things that never happened." Alexander said carefully, "It's time you saw something." He nodded toward the corner of the room where Glenn sat quietly in the shadows. Glenn opened his laptop, pulling up one of the recorded therapy sessions. Marcus watched his face drain of color as he saw himself and Emma being coached, observing how Tracy and Rick planted suggestions and twisted his recollections. "Oh God," Marcus choked out. "Emma. They are still doing this to Emma. We're going to stop them." Alexander promised, "But we need your help." Glenn moved forward, his military training evident in his precise movements. "Marcus, what we're about to ask you is difficult and potentially dangerous. You'll need to pretend everything is normal while helping us gather evidence. Can you do that?" Marcus wiped his eyes and straightened in his chair. "What do you need me to do?" Glenn's basement command center hummed with activity. New monitors displayed different aspects of their operation. One monitor showed a live feed from Rick's lake house, another tracked financial transactions, and a third displayed a complex timeline of events. "Your cancer's taken a turn for the worse," Glenn explained, pointing to the latest medical report they had doctored. "According to this, the treatment isn't working as well as hoped. The prognosis is 3 months, maybe less." Alexander examined the report. "They'll want to verify this," he said. "Already handled," Sylvia interjected. "I have a contact in hospital records. The information is in the system if they check." "They're checking," Marcus confirmed from his position at one of the monitors. He had proved remarkably adept at surveillance, his teenage facility with technology combining well with Glenn's training. Mom just accessed the hospital portal from her phone. "The wait was excruciating," he added. Alexander forced himself to breathe slowly, fighting the lingering effects of his latest treatment and the anxiety of waiting. Finally, Marcus's phone buzzed. "She's calling Rick," he reported, putting the phone on speaker. Tracy's voice filled the room. "Did you see it? The new prognosis." "I saw it," Rick's voice replied, carrying an edge of excitement poorly disguised as concern. "We need to move faster. How are the offshore accounts?" "Almost ready." "But Rick, the kids, stick to the plan," Tracy added. "Once we have the insurance money and the company assets, I'll be set for life." "The kids would only complicate things." Marcus's hands clenched into fists, but he maintained his composure, just as Glenn had trained him. Alexander felt a surge of pride amid his anger. His son was stronger than Tracy or Rick had ever guessed. Over the next week, they watched as Tracy and Rick accelerated their plans. Company assets began disappearing, transferred through a complex web of shell corporations. Insurance paperwork was updated. New accounts appeared in banks known for their discretion and handling large transactions. "They're getting sloppy," Sylvia observed, reviewing the latest financial records. "Making mistakes in their hurry." "Good," Glenn replied. He turned to Alexander. "It's time to bring in my FBI contacts. We've got enough evidence now. The financial fraud, the psychological abuse, the conspiracy. They'll want to move quickly." Alexander nodded, then looked at Marcus. "Are you ready for what comes next?" "Once we involve the FBI, there's no going back," Marcus said, glancing at the monitor showing Emma in her room doing homework, unaware of the truth about to break around her. "I'm ready. Emma deserves to know the truth," Alexander declared, swallowing hard. "Mom and Rick need to pay for what they've done." Glenn made the call. Within hours, his basement office filled with federal agents, each assigned to a specific aspect of the operation. They moved with quiet efficiency, documenting transactions, analyzing recordings, building their case. "We'll need your sister's testimony eventually," one agent explained gently to Marcus. "But not until she's ready. Dr. McPherson will help with that." The pieces were falling into place. Tracy and Rick's carefully constructed web of lies was about to collapse, but Alexander felt no satisfaction, only deep sadness for his children and what they'd endured. "Dad, what happens after? When is it all over?" Marcus asked. Alexander pulled his son close, his heart aching. "We rebuild. Together. Every memory they stole, every lie they told, we replace it with truth. This time, we build on solid ground." The monitors continued their silent vigil, recording every move Tracy and Rick made, every conversation, every attempt to destroy a family for profit. They had underestimated the strength of real family bonds, the resilience of truth, and the determination of a father's love. The end game was approaching, and this time, Alexander held all the cards. The family therapy center's waiting room smelled of artificial lavender and broken promises. Tracy sat primly on a beige couch, her manicured nails drumming against her designer purse. Rick stood by the window, his confidence evident. Neither noticed the slight bulge under the receptionist's desk, where surveillance equipment had been carefully installed the night before. Emma perched on the edge of her chair, dark circles under her eyes betraying nights of troubled sleep. Marcus sat beside her, his hand occasionally brushing against the concealed recording device in his jacket pocket. The weight of it felt like armor. "Remember what we practiced," Tracy whispered to Emma, her voice carrying clearly to the hidden microphones. "Dr. Patterson needs to hear about the incidents clearly." What Tracy didn't know was that Dr. Patterson had called in sick that morning. In his place, Dr. Claire McPherson sat in the consultation room, reviewing the final pieces of evidence with Alexander and the FBI agents. "They're all here," the receptionist confirmed through her earpiece. Claire nodded to Alexander. "Are you ready?" Alexander adjusted the collar of his shirt, hiding the medical port underneath. The latest round of chemotherapy had left him weaker, but determination burned in his eyes. "I've been ready since the day I saw that message on Tracy's phone," he declared as the receptionist's voice crackled through the waiting room speaker. "The doctor will see you now." Tracy stood, smoothing her skirt. "Come on, kids, remember, honesty is important." Marcus caught Emma's hand as they walked toward the consultation room. She squeezed back, not understanding why her brother's palm felt so sweaty. The consultation room door opened to reveal not the elderly Dr. Patterson, but a full complement of law enforcement officials, Child Protective Services representatives, and Dr. Claire McPherson. Alexander sat near a large screen mounted on a wall, with Glenn standing like a sentinel beside him. "What is this?" Tracy's composure cracked. "Where's Dr. Patterson?" "Please, everyone take a seat," Claire said in a firm, professional tone. "We have some recordings to review." Rick moved toward the door, but an FBI agent blocked his path. "This is a closed session, Mr. Nunez." The large screen flickered to life. The first image showed Tracy and Rick at his lake house, coaching Emma through her memories of abuse. Emma's face drained of color as she watched herself being manipulated, seeing the careful way they planted suggestions and twisted her recollections. "That's not what therapy sessions are about," Emma trembled. "Keep watching," Marcus whispered. The next clip showed Tracy and Rick discussing their plans in what they thought was a private moment. "Once we get the insurance money and the testimony, we'll disappear," Rick declared. Tracy added, "The kids would just complicate things. They're old enough to make their own way." "But what if they try to find us?" Tracy asked. "They won't. Not after we're done making them believe their father was a monster. Besides, who would believe them over all the documented abuse?" Emma's world tilted. She turned to her mother, seeking denial or explanation. "You were going to abandon us," she cried, her voice cracking. "Emma, honey, you don't understand," Tracy said, reaching for her daughter. But Emma recoiled. "Don't touch me." The teenager's legs gave out, and she would have fallen if Alexander hadn't moved to catch her. "Daddy, I'm so sorry. I really thought they made me believe," she sobbed. Alexander held his daughter as she broke down. Years of manufactured fears and false memories crumbled before undeniable truth. Marcus moved to join them, forming a protective circle around his sister. Rick made another move toward the door, but Glenn stepped in. "Going somewhere?" Glenn asked. "We haven't even gotten to the financial evidence yet." Claire gestured to the FBI agents. "I believe you have some questions for Ms. Sayer and Mr. Nunez." As the agents began reading Miranda rights, Emma clung to her father, her tears soaking into his shirt. "How can I trust any of my memories now? How do I know what's real?" "We'll figure it out together," Alexander promised, stroking her hair. "That's what family really means. Not manipulation, not lies, but standing together through hard times and helping each other heal." Tracy's mask finally cracked as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "Emma, Marcus, please, you have to understand. I was trying to protect you." "From what?" Marcus asked, his voice laced with scorn. "From a father who taught me how to build things, who came to every baseball game, who never, ever raised his voice. The only monsters here," Emma said quietly, "are you and Rick the monsters." The courthouse hallway echoed with footsteps and whispered conversations. Alexander sat on a wooden bench outside courtroom C, his children flanking him like honor guards. The chemotherapy had taken his hair, but not his dignity. His now bald appearance highlighted the stark contrast between reality and Tracy's manufactured accusations of abuse. Sylvia approached, her trial notes organized in her signature leather briefcase. The jury's coming back. That was fast. Only 4 hours of deliberation. Is that good or bad? Emma twisted the friendship bracelet on her wrist, a nervous habit. Sylvia smiled. It's very good. It means the evidence was overwhelming. They filed back into the courtroom. Tracy and Rick sat at separate tables with their attorneys, both looking considerably less polished after 3 months in county jail. The evidence against them had been too substantial for bail. The jury filed in, none making eye contact with the defendants. The forewoman handed the verdict forms to the bailiff, who passed them to Judge Marion Wheeler. The judge's face remained impassive as she reviewed the documents. "Will the defendants please rise?" Judge Wheeler asked. Tracy stood, her orange jumpsuit a far cry from her usual designer wardrobe. Rick's confident smirk had finally cracked, revealing desperation beneath. "On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find us?" "Guilty, Your Honor," she stated. "On the count of attempted grand larceny." "Guilty, Your Honor," the verdicts continued. "Guilty of child psychological abuse. Guilty of embezzlement. Guilty on all counts." Emma gripped Alexander's hand with each pronouncement, while Marcus sat upright with a stern expression. Judge Wheeler set aside the verdict forms. "Before I proceed with sentencing, I want to address something specific about this case." She looked directly at Tracy and Rick. "In my 30 years on the bench, I've seen many financial crimes. The theft, fraud, and embezzlement. But what you attempted goes beyond simple theft. You tried to steal children's love for their father. You attempted to destroy the foundation of their reality, their ability to trust their own memories and experiences. That is unforgivable." The judge adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Nunez, given your prior history of similar schemes in 3 other states, I sentence you to 25 years in state prison." "Miss Sayer, you are sentenced to 15 years, she continued, her gaze hardening. "And these sentences are to be served consecutively, not concurrently. There will be no opportunity for early release." Tracy crumpled in her chair. Rick's facade shattered as bailiffs led them away. "Emma, Marcus," Tracy called out, "please don't let it end like this." But her children had already turned away, following their father from the courtroom. In the hallway, they found Glenn and Claire waiting. "It's over," Glenn said simply. "No," Claire corrected gently. "Now the real work begins. Healing, rebuilding trust, reconstructing authentic memories to replace the manufactured ones." Alexander hugged his children close. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we'll do it together." 6 months after the trial, Alexander stood in the cancer ward of Metro General Hospital, his hand hovering over the brass bell that patients rang to mark the end of their treatment. The latest scans confirmed what his body had begun to tell him. The cancer was in remission. "Ring it, Dad," Marcus called from where he stood with Emma, both beaming with pride. Alexander gripped the bell's rope, and its clear tone rang through the ward. Medical staff appeared, applauding. Many had been with him through his darkest days. Dr. Jonathan Griffith emerged from the crowd, pulling Alexander into a careful hug. "When you first came in for that cough, I never imagined we'd be fighting 2 battles at once." 3 battles, Emma corrected, joining the embrace. The cancer, the betrayal, and our own minds. She had been working with Claire twice a week, slowly untangling the web of false memories from her authentic ones. "Speaking of minds," Claire said, appearing with a stack of journals under her arm, "I have your new writing prompts ready. Marcus, yours focuses on early baseball memories. Emma, we're going to work on those art class recollections you mentioned last session." The teenagers took their journals without complaint. The writing exercises had become a crucial part of their therapy. helping them strengthen real memories while identifying and processing the manufactured ones. Glenn's waiting at the house, Marcus reminded them. He's grilling steaks to celebrate. The drive home took them past their old neighborhood, but Alexander felt no pull toward the house he once shared with Tracy. Instead, he turned toward the new development where they'd started fresh, a home he designed himself, with input from both children. Glenn stood at the grill on their back deck, the smell of perfectly cooked meat filling the air. The retired Marine had become a fixture in their lives. Neighbors assumed he was family. Perfect timing. Glenn called out as he flipped a steak. "Emma, those potatoes you prepped are ready to go in the oven." As they settled around the outdoor table, Alexander watched his children, truly watching him. Emma no longer flinched at sudden movements, and Marcus had stopped compulsively checking his phone for messages from Tracy. They were healing, each in their own way. "I've been thinking," Emma said, pushing her vegetables around her plate. "I want to go back to the community center, maybe volunteer with the art program again." Alexander knew what this meant. The community center was where Tracy first began planting false memories about his behavior during Emma's art classes. Returning there was reclaiming her space, her real memories. "I'll go with you," Marcus offered. "They probably need help with the Little League program anyway." Claire nodded approvingly. "That's excellent progress. Remember what we talked about, replacing negative associations with new positive experiences." Glenn raised his glass to new experiences, then to family, the real kind built on truth and trust. "And to Dad," Emma added, her eyes shining, "for fighting for us even when we didn't know we needed saving." Later that evening, Alexander stood at his bedroom window, watching Emma and Marcus play basketball in the driveway. Their laughter floated up through the dusk, real and unburdened. On his dresser, 3 items sat in a row: the brass bell from the cancer ward, a family photo taken at the courthouse after the verdict, and a small construction level. The level, he decided, would become their new family symbol, a reminder that with the right foundation and careful work, anything can be built straight and true. Even a shattered family can be rebuilt, one authentic memory at a time. Epilogue. 10 years later, the autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee from Alexander Lee's new workshop, a sprawling space behind his rebuilt construction company headquarters. At 55, his hair had regrown silver after the chemotherapy, matching the distinguished lines around his eyes. The past decade had left its marks, but they were badges of survival, not scars of defeat. "Dad, the Mitchell project designs are ready for review," Emma's voice called from the office. At 27, she had followed in her father's footsteps, earning her architectural degree and joining the family business. Her designs had already won several sustainable building awards, bringing a fresh perspective to Lee Construction's portfolio. Alexander smiled, remembering how far they'd come. The same hands that once trembled holding Tracy's phone now steadily guided their company toward new horizons. The business had not only recovered from Rick's embezzlement, but had grown stronger, with Marcus handling the finances after completing his MBA. No contract was signed, no transaction approved without multiple sets of eyes reviewing the details, a lesson learned at too high a cost. "Send them to the conference room," Alexander called. "Glenn's coming by to see them too." Glenn Massey, now fully gray but still maintaining his military bearing, had remained an integral part of their lives. His security consulting firm occupied the east wing of the building, and he had become the uncle figure the children never had. His wedding to Dr. Claire McPherson 3 years ago had simply formalized what they all knew. Their unlikely family had grown stronger through adversity. Marcus entered carrying fresh coffee, his suit jacket draped over one arm. At 25, he had become a shrewd businessman with an unwavering moral compass. "Just got the quarterly update from the victim restitution program," he said, setting down the cups. 2 more of Rick's previous victims have been fully compensated. The program had been Marcus's initiative. After discovering more of Rick's past victims across different states, he established a fund to help them recover their losses. It was his way of turning their family's trauma into something positive. "Any word from the parole board?" Glenn asked, entering with a tablet under his arm. Alexander shook his head. Tracy's third appeal was denied last month. The psychological abuse charges particularly stuck, thanks to Claire's testimony. The mention of Tracy brought a familiar weight. She had served 8 years of her 15-year sentence, maintaining her innocence despite overwhelming evidence. Her letters to the children stopped after year 5. The last they heard, she had gained a reputation in the women's correctional facility for manipulating younger inmates, losing privileges, and being transferred to a higher security unit. Rick's fate was even grimmer. His 25-year sentence was extended after he attempted another scheme from prison, trying to manipulate a guard's wife into smuggling contraband. The additional charges ensured he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. "I saw her last week," Emma said quietly, entering with the project files. The room stilled. They all knew who she meant. Tracy. At the grocery store, of all places. "Remember Mrs. Henderson? She used to play bridge with Mom." Alexander nodded. The bridge club was one of Tracy's hunting grounds, where she spread the first whispered lies about my temper. "She couldn't look me in the eye," Emma continued, spreading the blueprints across the conference table. "None of them can anymore, not after everything came out in the trial." The whole bridge club dissolved. Nobody trusted each other after realizing they'd all been used to verify Mom's false stories. Dr. Claire McPherson arrived as Emma was speaking, her therapist's insight as sharp as ever despite her semi-retirement. She now focused solely on cases of false memory implantation, having become a leading expert. Her paper on the Lee case, with the family's permission and names changed, became required reading in several psychology programs. "How did seeing her make you feel?" Claire asked, settling into her usual chair. Emma's hands traced the lines of her latest design as she considered the question. "Sad. Mostly. Not for her, but for who I thought she was, the mother I remembered from my early childhood. I still don't know how much of that was real, and how much was manipulation," she added. "Good memories can be real even if the person who helped create them turns out to be false," Claire reminded her gently. Marcus loosened his tie, reminiscent of his teenage self. "I got another letter from Rick last week. He's still trying to claim he was manipulated by Mom, that he lost himself in her scheme." He shook his head. "The investigators found his previous cases too. 3 other families before us. He was always the architect, not the victim." "Speaking of architects," Glenn interjected, "show me these new designs, Emma. That sustainable materials program you proposed is exactly what the city contract needs." As Emma launched into her presentation, Alexander watched his family, the one he'd fought so hard to save, and the one that had grown beyond blood ties. Glenn and Claire sat close, their shoulders touching, while Marcus took notes with the same intensity he once applied to baseball. Each of them carried scars from the ordeal, but they had learned to wear them with grace. The workshop windows offered a view of the memorial garden they had planted 5 years ago, dedicated to victims of psychological abuse. It had been Emma's idea, a way to transform their pain into purpose. The garden became a sanctuary for families healing from similar betrayals, its paths lined with plaques of hope. Claire's therapy groups often met there, sitting among the flowers and sharing their stories. Some days, Alexander caught snippets of their conversations, tales of betrayal, manipulation, and eventual triumph that echoed his own journey. Each story reinforced what he had learned. The greatest victories often come disguised as defeats, and the deepest wounds can become wellsprings of strength. A young woman emerged from one such group session, wiping tears from her eyes. Alexander recognized her, the daughter of one of Rick's previous victims, now beginning to untangle the web of lies that had ensnared her family 15 years ago. Marcus had found her during his research for the restitution program. "Mr. Lee," she called out as she saw him through the window. "I wanted to thank you for what your family did, exposing them and establishing a support network. It helped me understand what happened to my mom." Alexander invited her in, introducing her to the others. As she shared her story, Emma and Marcus exchanged glances. They recognized their own past pain, but also the possibility of healing. "You know," Glenn said later as they locked up for the day, "when I first installed those surveillance cameras at Rick's lake house, I never imagined we'd end up here. Running a construction empire, hosting therapy groups, changing lives." Alexander replied, checking the security system, a habit he never lost. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead us to our truest path. The setting sun cast long shadows through the workshop, but unlike the shadows of their past, these were clean and honest. They stretched toward the garden where new flowers were always blooming, like the hope that grew from our darkest moments. Later that evening, they gathered at Alexander's house, a tradition that survived every storm. Claire brought her signature lasagna, Glenn mixed his famous virgin mojitos, and Emma's daughter Sophie practiced card tricks. Sophie, born 3 years after the trial, represented everything they had fought for. A new generation growing up surrounded by authentic love and honest memories. She knew the family history had been told in an age-appropriate version, but to her it was like a story from another world, one filled with Sunday dinners, family game nights, and unconditional love. As Alexander watched Sophie dealing cards with the focused expression Marcus once wore at baseball games, he realized this was their real victory, not the prison sentences, nor the recovered assets, nor even the professional successes. It was the simple ability to create genuine memories untainted by manipulation and lies. Tracy and Rick had tried to destroy his family with false memories, but in doing so, they taught them the immeasurable value of truth. Their betrayal forced Alexander to fight not just for his life, but for the essence of family love. In winning that fight, he and his children built something far stronger than what they'd lost, a legacy of honesty, resilience, and unconditional support that will echo through generations. The night ended as it always did, with everyone helping to clean up, making plans for next week's dinner, and sharing the small details that made up a real family's life. No manipulation, no hidden agendas, just the simple truth of people who chose to face life's challenges together. As the last car pulled away, Alexander stood in his doorway, breathing in the night air. Somewhere in a prison cell, Tracy and Rick faced the consequences of their choices. But here, in the home and family they tried to destroy, life bloomed anew, proving that the strongest foundations are built not on deception, but on unwavering love and truth. He closed the door, set the alarm, old habits die hard, and smiled at the family photos lining his hallway. Each photo told a story of recovery, renewal, and the kind of love that grows stronger when tested by fire. The shadows had long since lifted, replaced by a legacy of truth that continued to flower, season after season, year after year.